What would happen if a disgusting, good-for-nothing loser suddenly became the most brilliant, charismatic, and powerful being? Almost like a god among mortals. Is it worth paying such a high price? This man, who looks like a homeless person, is Eddie Moura, a writer struggling with laziness and procrastination. He can't even explain to others what his book is about. Nothing comes to mind, and hours pass. The days become the weeks. His apartment is a chaos, just like his life, which is going downhill. He has financial problems, and for worse, his girlfriend, who also paid the bills, left him. It's clear that Eddie is at his lowest point, even thinking about moving back to his parents' basement, almost a living dead man, which will be a total contrast to the version he is about to become. Strangely, he mentions he has a contract and is the reason he's writing a book. He is fully aware of his capacity, which makes him even more frustrated. The more pressure you put on having to do a creative activity, the less it works. Paradoxically, the more creative you are, the more chaotic your mind naturally tends to be. And creativity lies in bringing order to the chaos that dwells within you, something Eddie is clearly struggling to do. His desperation and abandonment are clouding his vision. But his life was about to change when one day, while walking down the street, he ran into his ex-brother-in-law. Because Eddie is also divorced from a previous relationship, they both go into a bar to chat. There, Eddie tells his ex-brother-in-law that he's struggling with his book due to the lack of creativity, and that it's really getting to him. The ex-brother-in-law says he can help with that, and gives him a pill named NZT48 that supposedly can unlock the brain's full potential. At first, Eddie refuses since the ex-brother-in-law used to be a drug dealer, but he tells him it's a legal product from a pharmaceutical company he works for. Finally, Eddie takes it. They both leave, and while walking down the street, Eddie takes the pill. Unsure of what will happen next, he finds his landlord's wife, and she starts yelling at him for not paying the rent and criticizing him for being a failure. When suddenly, Eddie starts to feel different. He not only experiences a cognitive shift, but also is enlightened in the most literal sense of the word. His eyes see the world in different colors. The film's visual palette transforms. From the grayish blues and muted tones of his previous existence, it shifts to radiant gold and saturated colors. This visual transformation is not a mere cinematic trick. It is the representation of a spiritual awakening. Then, Eddie utters a phrase that resonates with the biblical and mystical echoes.
I was blind, but now I see.
He asks her if she's having problems at law school, noticing she's studying law because he sees the corner of the law book in her bag that he recognizes. Having seen the same book 12 years ago, Eddie remembers everything he's ever seen and heard in his entire life and picks up on every detail around him. The woman thinks he knows this because he's a stalker. He's been following her, but he starts giving her advice about an article she has to write for the newspaper. Then they go into her apartment where he helps her with the article and sleeps with her. The substance comes wrapped in a promise of efficiency, using 100% of your brain to conquer 100% of the opportunities the world offers. A crystal clear pill promising clarity. He was blind, but now he could see. If we look at the subtle details in the way the pill was framed in Ed's first moments with it, one shot shows the pill directly in line with his pupil, symbolizing that what Ed is holding will change the way he sees things. And the other is when he looks at the pill before swallowing it, showing the NZ framed along with the keys to his apartment in his hands, symbolizing that it's like a master key, a key capable of opening all the doors previously locked in his mind. When SND took effect in his body, note that the first thing he witnessed is a third-person view of himself. This symbolizes Ed's detachment from ego, as if Ed was letting go of himself to be able to observe what he had been able to do that moment, and then reflect on what to do. The first thing Eddie does under the influence of NCT is compulsively clean his apartment. This is a seemingly mundane action, but this is actually very important. The exterior space reflects the interior space. By tidying his physical surroundings, Eddie is tidying his psyche. It is a purification ritual that marks the beginning of his transformation from a vulgar to enlightened. A clean environment brings mental clarity. It has been proven that an organized workspace makes us more creative, productive, and efficient. Then comes the creative explosion. We literally see letters falling from the sky as Eddie writes at insane speeds. It's as if universal knowledge is raining down on him, as if he's connected to a cosmic source of information. In a few hours, he completes what he couldn't do in months. The next day, the pill's effect had worn off, and everything returned to the depressing color of the original state. Eddie hands in the pages of his book to his boss. She loves them, but since Eddie knew he's no longer had the brilliance the pill gave him, he goes to his ex-brother-in-law's apartment for more. There, he finds that his ex-brother-in-law has been beaten up. Eddie asks who did this, but his ex-brother-in-law replies that he doesn't want to know and tells him that the pill is not a legal product, and he doesn't even know what's in it. But since the effect is so good, none of that matters. The transparency of NCT also functions as a metaphor for the illusion of control. It seems that because of transparency, Eddie can see through it, can fully understand what he's talking, but the true nature of the substance remains opaque. It's a physical transparency contrast, sharply with the opacity of its true effects. Eddie believes he controls the substance, but he soon discovers that it is the substance that controls him. It seems to conceal nothing sinister, like pure crystal promising unstructured vision. But this apparent purity is the substance's first lie. NCT is the apple of Eden in a pharmaceutical form, the tempting fruit that grants forbidden knowledge. And like every apple of Eden, it comes occupied by a serpent whispering promises of divinity. Eddie tells him he wants more. The ex-brother-in-law takes advantage of this by making him run some errands. Eddie has to go to the dry cleaners for his clothes and brings him something to eat. When Eddie returns, he finds the apartment a mess and his ex-brother-in-law dead. Eddie hears a noise and is quite scared and calls the police. But before they arrive, Eddie searched everywhere for the pills, confident that the killer who was surely after the NCT hadn't found them. Finally, they searched the oven and found many dozens of it, along with a good sum of money and a notebook. Then the police arrived and took Eddie to the station for questioning. And although the policeman told him that something didn't add up, he let him go anyway. From now on, with the help of the pills, Eddie's life changes radically, and what comes next was organizing your appearance. After all, it wouldn't do much good to organize what your eyes saw if what others saw in your eyes was a mess. He's projecting to the world his best version. He finishes his book, learns to play piano in 3 days, start making money playing poker, and easily learns other languages to have intellectual conversations with people, and seduces many women in the process. Suddenly, Eddie has knowledge about everything, impressing people with great social status. In this way, he meets a man who invites him to work with him in the stock market, and also invites him to the beach in a private jet to a party in a mansion surrounded by millionaires. All his fears, all his shyness were gone. His reflexes are sharp. He really seems to be enjoying everything life has to offer to the fullest. NCT bears the number 48, which some interpret as a reference to the laws of political and social power. It is a substance designed for horizontal dominance and for climbing social hierarchies to get power. It is at this point that a thought, an idea, begins to invade Eddie. If I'm not making progress, I'll feel like I'm going to explode. And symbolizing the scene, he throws himself into the void of this idea, where there's no bottom to quench uncontrolled ambition. This new idea requires money, a lot of it. He starts studying the stock market. One day he earns $2,000, the next day $7,500. But still very slow. And although he was very intelligent, he decides to ask a mobster for a loan. He gets in touch with a guy named Gennady and asks him for $100,000. The problem is that since he doesn't know him, he doesn't want to give him the money. He thinks he's cheating in some sort of way, but Eddie ends up convincing him and they close the deal. Dostoevsky warned that a mind without any limits could lead to the moral, existential, and spiritual ruin presented precisely at this point in the film.
Quintupled my money 4 days in a row.
So you got a fix in the game.
Okay, it's a fix.
For him, the idea of a mind without limits, from the point of view of surpassing moral, social, and spiritual conventions, is not an ideal of freedom, but a dangerous abyss. He believed that a person without a sense of limits, imposed by things like faith, conscience, or commune with other people, tend to become self-destructive, alienated from others, incapable of justifying any evil in pursuit of their plans, which, let's face it, is what Eddie is slowly becoming. But how far could he go? Eddie begins investing with complete focus. Having doubled his dosage of the pills, his name became increasingly well known, and by the end of the week, his brokerage account reaches $2 million. Eddie has dinner with his ex-girlfriend Lindy, as they're still friends. She's impressed by the radical transformation he has undergone, and Eddie wondered how Lindy put up with him for so long if he was such a big failure. She replies that she was in love with him, so the couple returns even more in love, passionate than ever. One day, while walking down the street, Eddie noticed a man acting strangely, which made him uneasy. Later, Eddie had his first episode jumping or memory gaps, feeling like he was going from one place to another without knowing how he got there. However, Eddie's fame as an investor continued to grow, leading him to a meeting with Carl van Loon, one of the most prestigious investors. The investor tested Eric's financial analysis skills, and just by looking at him, he realized that the man plans to merge his company with Hall. But he tells him with those contracts, the business isn't going to work. Carl is surprised, so he invites him to his office the next day to arrange the contracts. Excited by this, Eddie wanted to walk around and absorb more and more information. Here, Eddie talks about how there are moments in life when you cross a bridge where you leave your old life behind, and he wonders how far he can go. CEO? President? As Eddie ascends his personal Olympus of intelligence and success, the film begins to reveal the cracks in his artificial paradise. His initial transformation is intoxicating. He finishes his book, conquers Wall Street, and seduces effortlessly, but each victory fuels a voracious appetite for more power and control. Pride takes a hold of him. That access, that arrogance of believing himself invincible, will inevitably lead him to his downfall. Eddie develops an obsession that goes beyond mere success. Each achievement leaves him wanting more. When a series of jumps begins, he ends at a party. He sees the same strange-looking man from before following him again, spends time with a woman in white, gets involved in a fight where Eddie doesn't know how to fight but remembers Bruce Lee's tapes, and the pill that allows him to defend himself. When dawn breaks, He's completely disoriented and injured with almost no memory of what happened. He goes home to sleep. As you can imagine, this man forgot he had the meeting with Carl. On top of that, he runs out of the NCT for the first time. Then he arrives at the meeting late, sleep-deprived and suffering from withdrawal. But it doesn't end there, because in addition to that, he lost all his knowledge. Everything goes quite well, until it comes out on the news that the girl he was with last night, with the white dress, was found dead in her room. Eddie goes outside to vomit, looking really sick. He wonders if he could have been the one who killed her, since he didn't remember anything he had done the day before. Eddie receives a call from his ex-wife, asking about her brother. Give him anything that would be dangerous. Eddie tells her he needs to see her to talk. Then Eddie looks for the notebook his former brother-in-law had, which contained the phone numbers of his clients. He calls them one by one, learning that they're all either dead or seriously ill. He starts to worry. Then he calls the last number on the list. He realizes that it's the guy who's been following him from the past few days, and who was also at the hotel the night of the murder. He runs and the man chases him. Although he is still limping, Eddie manages to escape until he reaches a restaurant where he finds his ex-wife, who looks noticeably deteriorated. She tells Eddie that she's also took NCT, until she realizes that no one can maintain such a high level of mental capacity without collapsing. She adds that the drug makes them addicted to the point that if they stop, they will die. Although she didn't take it long enough for it to kill her when she stopped, and it did permanently damage her brain. She tells him to gradually reduce the dose but not to stop completely because he will die. But the problem doesn't end there. Eddie goes to look for some pills. Before reaching his apartment, he runs into the mobster he'd forgotten he owed money to in all of this mess. The guy shoves him all the way to his apartment, demanding he find the money. There, he punches him, causing Eddie to drop the pills he was about to take. The mobster grabs the NCT. The price of NCT is dependence. Eddie experiences time-lapse, moments where his body operates on autopilot while his conscience disappears. He wakes up in an unfamiliar place, with no memory of how he got there, functioning outwardly but absent within. When the supply is cut off, the deterioration is brutal, tremors, pallor, and inability to concentrate. But even more disturbing is seeing other users who have become deteriorated versions of themselves, permanently aged, ghosts of their former brilliance. NCT creates a dependence that transforms enhancements into replacements. The original person becomes a prisoner of their enhanced version. Unlike a true illuminated being who develops conscious gradually and continuously, Eddie operates in flashes, moments, a hyperclarity followed by absolute emptiness. His process is artificial, forced, and therefore so unstable. Eddie goes to the bank, withdraws the money, and pays the mobster, who feels great after the pill. Eddie, unable to take the pill, becomes very ill and arrives at his girlfriend's office, almost fainting. There, he tells her the whole truth, and she, although somewhat distraught, offers to bring him the NCT because it turns out the only bag he had left was hidden in her house. When she was in her apartment, she looks for the pills. When she gets back in the taxi, she calls Eddie, telling him there's a man following her, the same man who chased Eddie earlier. He starts chasing her, running through a park and killing two men who try to defend her. A frightened Lindy hides behind a rock and tells Eddie on the phone that she doesn't know what to do. He tells her to take the pill and swallow it, and that way she'll know what to do. She does, and immediately starts calculating the situation. Then she runs, grabs a girl who is roller skating, and cuts the old man's cheeks with a skate. She escapes and goes to Eddie. They both go to the hotel, where she tells him that she's worried that when she takes the pill, she becomes a different person. He tells her he's the same person, that he has a plan, and when the time is right, he'll stop taking the pill. The withdrawal affects Eddie's experience, shows us the consequence of the easy route. It's not just that his body has become dependent on the substance. His very identity has become addicted to the feeling of being superior. We saw this at the beach when he said he needs to keep moving forward. Eddie could not tolerate returning to being merely human after having tasted artificial divinity. The withdrawal he experiences is not only physical, but existential. Without NCT, he not only loses his superhuman abilities, but also his sense of purpose, his self-esteem, his connection to meaning. He faces the existential void he was avoiding when he started taking the drug. This dynamic illustrates how shortcuts to transcendence often becomes a dead end. Eddie wants to skip the slow, patient work of our personal growth and end up trapped in a circle of dependence that is both chemical and psychological. Eddie looks at the window and sees the mobster who took the pill outside. The hotel is staring at him. Eddie goes outside, and the mobster tells him he wants more pills or he'll kill him. Eddie knows the mobster won't stop bothering him, so to buy time, he gives him some pills until he finds a permanent solution. Then he hires bodyguards and goes back to work with Carl Van Loon in what is the biggest merger in the corporate history. Eddie discovers that leading a healthy lifestyle will help him avoid the time lapse. He asks his tailor to make a secret compartment in his jacket to store the NCT, and knowing that at some point he'll run out. He pays the lab $2 million to copy the formula and make more of it if they could do it in 6 months. Eddie has become from being the temporary vessel of an external power to becoming the permanent embodiment of the same power. Things complicate a little when Eddie was eating at a restaurant. The police officer who had initially questioned him about the death of his former brother-in-law arrived, telling him that a witness from the hotel where the woman in the white dress was found dead had identified him as a suspect and took him into custody. Eddie called one of the city top lawyers, who got him released immediately. At a meeting about the merger Eddie was working on, we see that the owner of the other corporation is in poor health. After the meeting, Carl tells Eddie in somewhat threatening tone that if he plans to leave after the merger, it's not in his best interest to become his competition. Here, Robert De Niro's speech tells him a very interesting speech that ties in with the intro of the video. What if you became the best version of yourself overnight? He starts questioning whether his seductive powers were chance or a gift from God. But is that a gift, not earned? He doesn't know what he knows. He hasn't earned those powers. Von Loon views Eddie's intelligence as a gift via the drug, rather than a skill developed through hard work, comparing him to a brat with his trust fund. He points his lack of real competence because Eddie hasn't done the time or the corporate ladder. He doesn't know how to assess the real high-level competition, while also adding he lacks the foundation. He's unprepared to be independent and should work for him rather than against him. While Carl has a point on how he hasn't had to fight to get to the position, we also notice how it benefits him that Eddie isn't his enemy. Eddie arrives at his hotel room and finds that it has been trashed, apparently by the mobster who is still after him for more pills, and who also tells him that if he doesn't give him more NZT, he will make the businessman he works with know about his murder accusation. Because of this, Eddie buys a high-security apartment, almost like a fortress worth $8.5 million. The day arrives for the signing of the merger Eddie is working on. He's going to make $40 million, but the owner of the other corporation doesn't show up. Instead, his wife arrives. Her husband can't sign yet because he's in the hospital in serious condition. The lawyers accompany the woman to her car. Here, Eddie finds out that the lady's driver was the man who had been chasing him all this time to get the NZT for his boss, who had gone sick because he had run out of the substance. Eddie arrives at the police station with his lawyer to be identified, along with other suspects, by the witness who pointed him out for the death of the woman in the white dress. His lawyer tells him that he made other suspects look very similar to him, to make it more difficult for the substance to identify him. And finally, the witness hesitates, and Eddie's acquitted of the charge. Things will go south now. The lawyer returns a jacket Eddie had taken off to make the identification and leaves. Eddie calmly returns, and they both see on the news that the owner of the other corporation has just fallen into a coma. Carl asks Eric how the deal suddenly fell apart. When Eddie's pill starts to wear off, he goes to the bathroom, takes another one, but he checks his jacket and finds it empty, and those were the last pills he had left. Eddie returns to Carl when he receives a box that wasn't sent to him. Inside are the hands of his bodyguards. Horrified, he quickly leaves and arrives at his apartment. There, he sees on the news the wife of the owner of the other corporation, testifying about her husband and realizing that his lawyer is on the corner. He also worked for those people, which is why he stole the pills. Suddenly, the mobster and his thugs start banging on his door to get in, take the pills, and finish the job. Knowing the slow and painful future that awaits him with the mobster, he decides to stand on the balcony and throw himself into the void. The climax of Eddie's journey confronts him with a harsh reality. All illegitimately obtained power demands a price, and that price is always higher than what we are initially willing to pay. It almost warns us about the dangers of human arrogance. It's no coincidence that Eddie appears on the rooftop at the beginning, at the edge of the abyss. He's a man who's climbed to the heights of the gods, and now faces the possibility of plunging into the void, a victim of his own excess. However, we are instinctive creatures. We want to live, and somehow, his clouded mind remembered a possible last pill. He goes and looks for it and finds one. But when he's about to take it, the bad man manages to get him and drops the pill and loses it. They grab Eddie and beat him up, and the mobster had only one pill left and had dissolved it into an injection, because according to him, it was injected directly into the veins. The effect lasts longer. Gives himself the injection and sends his men to search the place for NZT. While asking Eddie where he has it, Eddie tells him he's run out. Then the mobster pulls out a torture kit to force Eric to tell him where the NZT is. Eddie stabs him with a knife and manages to grab him from a box, and the mobster dies, his blood spilling into the floor. Eric, on the other side, knowing that there's no more pills, drinks the mobster's blood. The most powerful image of his downfall comes in a scene where he's forced to drink blood to survive, cornered by the mobster without pills and dying. Eddie drinking blood is almost an act that symbolizes the absolute loss of his humanity. He kills the mobster and drinks his blood to absorb the NZT he had consumed. This scene is devastating on multiple levels. Visually, we see the sophisticated intellectual reduced to a primitive, almost vampiric creature drinking blood from the ground. It is the accumulation of his degradation. To maintain his godlike power, he must consume the life force of another. The image of the vampire is perfect for understanding what Eddie has become. Vampires are immortal and superior in many ways, but they pay with eternal damnation, and they need to feed on blood. Eddie is a vampire of knowledge, someone who lives of substance he cannot produce naturally, unable to exist without it, condemned to a dependence that consumes his soul. After drinking the blood, Eddie Man plays dead, and when one of the mobsters approaches out of the pity for his boss, Eddie attacks the only eyes he still has and ends up blinding him. He starts fighting the other guys while the blind man starts shooting in all directions. Then Eddie uses all his intelligence to get rid of him once and for all, and once he gets rid of the other guy, he leaves the house as if nothing happened. Eddie has already crossed the bridge that has separated him from his former life, and there's no going back. His insatiable desire for survival, yes, but also for ambition, has transformed him into another person. Since the previous owner of the other apartment was a drug dealer, the police won't suspect him. Later, we see that the owner of the other corporation finally dies because the lawyer kept the pills for himself and never gave it to the businessman. Eddie goes to the hospital and talks to the man who was chasing him, making him see the lawyer's betrayal, and with his help, he recovers the lawyer's NZT. 12 months later, Eddie's book comes out. He entered politics as a candidate for senator. Suddenly, he receives a visit from Carl, who tells him that he knows about the NZT and that he also bought the lab that makes them and ordered Eddie's lab to be shut down. So if he wants more pills, he has to do what Carl asks of him when he gets to the Senate. Eddie tells him no. Carl tells him he has no choice, in which Eddie replies that he knows about his illegal dealings. He also anticipates a car accident before it happens right in front of his eyes and deduces that Carl has heart problems, telling him that he is 50 steps ahead of him and that he already knows how the pill is made and can improve it and creates it from scratch, so he has nothing to threaten him with. The real question the film poses is not whether Eddie achieved greatness, but what kind of greatness he attained. Is it the greatness of the person whose divine powers leaving everything around him better, or the greatness of the tyrant who has learned to manipulate the world to his advantage? Eddie goes out to lunch with his now wife Lindy, who tells him that he hasn't gotten used to his haircut, and he says,
Well, I'm a new man.
he's become the perfect predator, elegant, lethal, completely integrated into the system and now dominates from above. Eddie's victory over Carl Van Loon could be interpreted as the emplacement of one type of tyranny with another potential more dangerous one. In Limitless, Eddie Moura embodies both our highest inspiration and our most subtle dangers. He's Nietzsche's Superman dream realized, but also a warning of what we could lose in the process of becoming more than human. The film doesn't condemn ambition or the desire for personal growth. What it questions is impatience, the search for shortcuts, and the belief that we can skip the necessary stages of inner development. Eddie wanted to become a god without going through the process of becoming wise, and that obsession almost cost him everything.